Let me start by saying I've done a lot of things in my life that I'm pretty proud of. I've been married for 15 years. I think my kids think I'm okay. Got a pretty good job. I even got a PhD. But you know what I'm most proud of, I think, is making it through Jada Pinkett Smith's book, Worthy. That seems like kind of a nasty way to start this off. It was a long book. I'll just say I got through it. It was a long book. I thought a lot about how to discuss this book because I think a lot of people are going to give her a hard time for this book. I don't think it's going to get rave reviews, and I'm going to add to the chorus of people that didn't love it. And I think that writing a book is maybe one of the most impressive things that a person can do. And I also recognize that Jada came from nothing. She had a horrific background, and she became exceptionally successful. Her experience in America as a black woman is very different than mine. And I'm worried about sitting here spitting spit wads at her life and her sort of life's efforts. So what I'm going to try to do is minimize the discussion of her childhood, the part of her life that she didn't have control over. And I'm going to try to be as objective as possible about evaluating the content of Jada's book. You'll have to be the judge if I do that well or not, but that's my intention. Okay, so we have a lot to talk about here. This was a very long book. I'm just going to sort of go down the list of components of the book that I thought were important. The first is the global style of the book. How did the book read? I thought that Jada made a very good effort to add value for the reader. So every chapter kind of follows the same global pattern. There's a description of Jada's life, and then it ends with some pearl of wisdom. I think that if you didn't know who the author was and you just heard the pearls of wisdom, you would think that they are all totally reasonable. Platitudes. I don't think it's not the world's deepest content, but her effort is to say, hey, here's what I went through, here's the pearl I learned, and here's your takeaway. That's the global pattern for every chapter of the book. The way the book is, her style of writing, she talks about everything in this exceptional depth that feels a lot of bit self-aggrandizing. It's this slightly patronizing tone of, here's what I went through, and here's the really sophisticated way to think about this experience. And if maybe I'm just defensive or something, but it feels a little bit like I think she believes that her perspective on these events in her life, I think she really believes she has a very nuanced and very correct perspective on those events. And as a reader, I found myself constantly annoyed because I vehemently disagreed with almost all of her views. I also thought that it was way too long. I mean, she gives you granular details about every aspect of her life, and some of it feels exceptionally unnecessary. She's describing the type of flowers that were in her grandmother's garden, and you're like, oh my God, I simply don't care. And she's trying to paint this picture of who she was. She's this precocious young girl that has these really strong figures in her life. That's the idea, but it's chapters and chapters of that style of writing. Okay, her childhood. Like I said, I don't want to talk about what happened. I don't want to judge what happened in her childhood, but I do think it's important to discuss kind of how she evaluates her childhood now. And I'm torn because on the one hand, if I were Jada's therapist, I would want her to have the exact view that she has, which is if you've been through traumatic events in your life, it's really valuable to be able to think through them and make meaning from those interactions. It's really good to have perspective and understand the whole of the traumatic figures. And then on the other hand, when you read the book and she's talking about her childhood, it feels to me as the reader, who I know is disconnected from what she's been through, it feels to me like she is giving just a major pass to all of these people in her life. And the one that stands out to me is her mother. She talks about her mother like she was this very caring woman who was a very skilled OBGYN nurse, who is this pillar in her life. And her mother was also using heroin for 2 decades. And so it's as a reader, it didn't feel, I'll say this. I just thought there was a missed opportunity there for Jada to talk more openly about how difficult it is to have that kind of a background, but also recognize that those people in your life that were struggling when you were growing up are all that you have. And so for Jada, for example, she has to find a way to forgive her mom, to help her mom reintegrate into the family, to introduce her mom to her kids. But Jada knows who her mom was when she was growing up. And that sort of emotional journey, I think, is really interesting. And I felt like in the book, the drug abuse, the 2 decades of heroin use were sort of minimized, and we're just talking about her mom like she was wonderful. And as an outsider, I'm going, man, it didn't seem that way to me. So the other piece of her childhood I thought that was interesting was the discussion of Tupac. And here's what I got to say. I had no problem with it. I mean, it could be because I thought the Tupac stuff was interesting, and I would love to read Tupac's memoir if he wrote one. But I didn't think that Jada went over the top. If you watch other people talk about this book or talk about Jada, there's a lot of talk about her fabricating a relationship or shoehorning him in or acting like they were in love when Tupac died. And I didn't feel like she did that at all. I thought it was a reasonable amount of he was a big figure in the book, but I think that he was a big figure in her life. So it didn't seem, I thought it was a value add, and if I were her editor, I would have said, yeah, keep that in. It's interesting. And that's a good segue to the relationship with Will Smith. I thought the chapter was interesting. I thought it was well written. But if I were Will's friend and all of these events were happening, I can't tell you how fast I would tell him to run for the hills. Holy red flag. Like, one example is there's a scene described where Jada gets upset with Will because Will is talking to his ex-wife, who happens to be the mother of Will's firstborn son. She gets upset about this, and Will turns to her and snaps at her and says, look, I'm going to have a relationship with the mother of my firstborn. Jada feels, I think, embarrassed and some shame, and responds by sneaking out of the house, climbing to the roof of the house. Some other person gets to see her do this. She gets on the roof and she runs in the middle of the night off the roof, jumps off of the roof, screams, I love you, Will, and splashes into the pool. She could have missed the pool and died on the side of the pool, but she makes it in, thank God. She gets out like a wet rat. Will sees her, comforts her, and brings her in. And she's, I think, saying, look how crazy in love we were. And as a reader, I'm going, this is the most unstable relationship. Only because Will has his own stuff going on does he possibly tolerate that kind of behavior from her. I'm not making any diagnoses, but I can tell you that any clinician listens to that story and there are diagnostic bells ringing. It is just a very extreme example of Jada manipulating and maneuvering the people around her and being totally unable to deal with her own emotions. Now, the marriage to Will Smith is described in excruciating detail. She is dragged kicking and screaming to the altar because she's pregnant with Jaden. She doesn't want to do it at first, but eventually it's a good decision, whatever. They decide not to sign a prenup because they are making an agreement with each other to never leave one another. And this agreement is very important to Jada, and it's the reason why they can never officially get divorced. Jada does recognize that a man in Will Smith's position, and men in general, are subject to temptation. So they make a decision in their relationship that they would always, try and track my logic here, they're not going to have an open marriage. You are not allowed to step out of the marriage. But if you're overcome by temptation, just let me know. Which feels a little bit like you're allowed to step out as long as you let me know, which would fit into the category. I don't quite understand. It's like the mental gymnastics in this book as far as how they decide how they're going to navigate things. As I've said before in discussing Jada, just as a side note, if you ever can't in a very linear way describe your relationship with somebody, there's a problem. And I have a little bit of an axe to grind because I know that, and I've done videos on it before, that Will and Jada have seen Esther Pearl, or I can never pronounce her name correctly, have seen Esther Pearl as a therapist. And Esther Pearl is really famous for explaining that in relationships, your one partner can't meet all of your needs, so it's very normal to need to step out of a relationship to get other needs met, which makes sense, right? Like, of course, my wife doesn't necessarily have to be my bodybuilding partner, and if I want to go work out, I might have to step out of the relationship to do that. And my wife may not be my I may not be my wife's intellectual partner, and she may need to step out of the relationship to discuss whatever, right? Like, that's the idea. And so it just sort of goes to follow that somebody's romantic needs may not be met by a partner. And so Esther Pearl does a lot of, in my opinion, a lot of intellectualizing behavior that is emotionally damaging. That's how it strikes me, which is really, in my opinion, Jada and Will's biggest challenge is they're so hell-bent on living on the fringes and doing things differently that they end up separately aligning with different figureheads and different theories and different ways of living, and the two of them aren't aligned at all. So like the research is overwhelming. You can have a happy and healthy marriage that is open, and you can have a happy and healthy marriage that is monogamous. And statistically, you're equally likely to be successful in either relationship if both people are fully committed and aligned. And in the case of Will and Jada, they weren't aligned. That, in my opinion. Okay, let's talk about parenting and Jada. I thought, because I have a lot to say. Remember how in the beginning I was saying that Jada talks in this sort of self-aggrandizing, kind of patronizing way. I think that she just has this strong need to elevate herself and view things differently. And it shows up in the way that she approaches parenting. So one example is with Jaden. She starts off saying, my son Jaden has an incredible intuition, and you really got to trust his intuition. I've learned to let him lead me. Which, okay, every mother has a distorted view of their kids' capabilities. But then she gives an example. An example of Jaden's incredible intuition and strength is when she dropped him off to daycare. She brought him to daycare for the first time, and he said, I don't want to go to daycare. And she dropped him off anyway, and she waited until it was like a half-day daycare or whatever, and she waited to pick him up. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, his intuition was right. He must have been abused at the daycare. No. She picks him up, and he's just waiting by the door. And the teacher says, look, this kid's not, he's a great kid, but he's not integrating socially. He goes for an entire week, I think it was an entire week, and he never integrates socially. And Jada goes, look at my son's intuition. He didn't want to go to daycare, and he was right. I'm going to homeschool him. And he never goes to daycare ever again. And Willow never goes to public school ever again until I think like her 6th grade for 1 year. But the kids had strong intuition about whether or not school was good for them, and so she homeschooled them.
This kind, gentle, self-possessed child, standing in his own skin, feet on solid ground, not bending. He was never left in an educational institution ever again, unless by his own self-determination.
If I was a contrarian and maybe a psychologist, I might suggest an alternative interpretation of the situation. Maybe because the kids have been sheltered and they've been carted around with their parents to different movie sets and everything has been about them, maybe they struggled when they were put into a daycare where the world didn't revolve around them. Maybe they had difficulty integrating socially because they were the lack of exposure to more typical children. Maybe it would have been really valuable for her kids to learn how to integrate in a typical classroom. Maybe it's not because your kid's a savant, right? But she talks herself into this sort of odd interpretation of everything. And I'll give you another example. Will's oldest kid, Trey, has a habit of giving things away. She talks about how she noticed that he had a friend over, and Trey had a bunch of nice sneakers. and, that had been bought and given to him by Jada or by Will or whoever. And the friend was over, and Trey had given all of the shoes away to the friend. And Jada goes, "What are you doing? Why are you giving all your shoes away to the friend?" And Trey said, "I don't want them. He can have them." Jada's interpretation of that is, well, he has a really well-grounded perspective of what's important in life, and he understands that sneakers aren't that valuable, so he wants to give that stuff away. He's a minimalist. At this time, the kid's like 7 or 8 or whatever. But he's adopted a minimalist's lifestyle. An alternative perspective would be, you have a kid that wants to be well-liked. He's got a ton of shoes that are just given to him, and so his way of earning the positive regard of his peer is to give his crap away. Maybe the parenting intervention could be to make sure your son's self-esteem is such that he doesn't feel like he has to buy friendship, but that he's enough for his friends without giving his stuff away. But that's not how Jada sees it. No. So instead, she allows him to give away whatever he wants because he owns it. And so when she doesn't want him to give things away, she tells him, "This is mine. I'm letting you use these sneakers, but they're mine, so you can't give them away." It's just like it's like she just so values, and she'll say this, she so values putting her kids in the driver's seat. She so values their independence that she, I think, distorts her like traditional parenting strategies in a really negative way. And I think, again, now you can just say crazy psychologist. My argument would be she is doing that because she was forced as a child to be exceptionally independent. Because she could only trust herself, Jada became a very powerful woman. And I think she looks back and goes, I like the fact that I am the way I am. How can I instill that in my kids? I think that for Will, he similarly had to trust and rely only on himself. And so I think as parents, they're going, this is how we need to raise our children. The challenge is they both came from very sick backgrounds. And while it sounds really idyllic to have kids at a very young age, I'm talking like, she's got Willow making career decisions at 8. Like, you might ask, well, what's the problem with that? I think it's a problem because at that age, kids are looking to be anchored. Kids are learning about the world. And if they don't have parental figures that say, this is right, this is wrong, yes, the kid will have to figure it out on their own, but the kid also will experience a great deal of anxiety. And oftentimes they will feel distant from the world around them because they don't understand the world around them. So if you just validate their independence, it's oftentimes very distressing. Like, I'm trying to give a better analogy beyond dogs. But think about dogs that are difficult to take care of, like a beagle breed or like what are the ones that, the heel-biting ones? Whatever, there's a breed of dogs that are like working dogs. Those dogs do better when they have very clear direction. If you have a puppy and you just let it sleep in your bed every night and do whatever it wants, that dog will experience more anxiety than a dog that has a clear understanding of right and wrong. Now, certainly, there's a time when you want your kids to be able to step out and, as Jada calls it, feel the rain, which Jaden did when he was 15. When he was 15, Jada came home and Jaden said, I'm out, my bags are packed, I'm going to go move in with friends. And Jada goes, well, he needs to feel the rain, go out on his own, so she let him go. If he weren't exceptionally wealthy, a 15-year-old is running away from home. Is he doing that because he feels like he has this incredible autonomy and a lot of stability? Or is that poor kid trying to figure life out and under your roof, he's not feeling like it's very healthy? The fact that these two keep going on to popular media and saying we've got parenting figured out is bananas to me. Okay, ayahuasca, I've talked about it in my previous videos about Jada, so I'll make it quick. There are a lot of people that have had very positive experiences with ayahuasca. There's also a lot of people that have had very negative experiences with ayahuasca. It is something. It is definitely not a panacea. Now, Jada doesn't say it's a panacea for everybody, but she does say that she was suicidal. She was driving on the cliffs trying to find where she could drive her car off and kill herself. Then she did ayahuasca, and the experience was so incredible for her that she knew she would never have to experience that kind of distress again. And in my previous video, I'll link here, I said BS. Now, I'm not saying BS to the fact that ayahuasca could have been helpful. I'm just saying I don't like the way she's describing suicidal ideation. Everybody that I've ever interacted with that is so depressed that they're thinking about ending their lives, they are, it's a traumatic experience. They feel so empty, so out of control, so there's just no light at the end of the tunnel that even when they're able to move out of it, they are very active behaviorally to sort of prevent that from happening again. They will always think about being there and what do I need to do? How do I reduce? How do I structure my life in a way so that I can prevent myself from going back there? I've never heard anybody that has experienced true suicidal ideation say, "Done with that. Never going to experience it again. Just drink this root juice and problem solved." And so the fact that Jada talks about it like that makes me think that she's exaggerating the suicidal ideation. It makes me think that she doesn't really know what the depth of that pain is or what that's like. Otherwise, I don't think she would talk about it the way that she is. Now, my favorite topic, Jada's entanglement. Did I use the term mental gymnastics before? This section of the book is like, she is Elastigirl with her ability to flex and pivot as she's talking about her relationship with Will and how the relationship with August Alsina developed and evolved. So, yes, August was a friend of Jaden's first, but not his best friend. She wants to make sure you know, not his best friend. Yes, she was younger, or he was younger than her, but not Jaden's age. And he had some mental health issues and some physical distress, and she only wanted to help and support him. And then things got a little bit, there was some untoward behaviors and all, whatever, right? That's it. It happened. It could happen to anybody. Whatever. She started sleeping with this guy, and she says that Will knows about it per the covenant they have. Will didn't like it, but he knew about it because, they can never get divorced, and you're not allowed to have an affair, but if you're going to have an affair, you should let me know. So she must have let him know. And then they were on the red table, and Jada, what has really differentiated the red table is that she asks everybody to speak honestly about who they are. And so she thought, well, I'm going to speak honestly about who I am. And Will said, I want to speak it honestly with you. I don't know, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But according to her, she did. And the way Will showed up was not the way that he was supposed to show up. He was supposed to say, we were separated at the time. So I think this is officially the start of their 7-year separation. But you know how they're really honest and transparent, the red table. She wasn't honest about that one thing. Like, she didn't say that we were separated, but she should have. And Will, you wouldn't believe it, he got upset when he was talking about her entanglement. She was mad at herself for being looked at like she was the unfaithful wife. And as the reader, I think you're a little bit like, what the hell are you talking about? So, here's what happened. She hooked up with this guy. By the way, August Alsina, had serious mental health issues after Jada. She hurt him badly. He was hurting before. I think she took advantage of him. I think she wanted to feel good. I think she wanted to feel attractive. And so she pursued this younger guy. And I think it was not a thoughtful thing for her to do, for August or for Will. And I think she wants to go onto the red table and do her thing where she does the mental gymnastics to explain it away, and Will doesn't play the game right. It looks like Will didn't know about it, and it looks like Will's hurt about it, which surprised Jada. And then she wasn't able to say to Will, yeah, but you knew, and yeah, we were on a break. Maybe Will made her look bad because he wasn't honest about the fact that they were on a break, or he wasn't honest about the fact that he knew about it. But it doesn't change for me the reality for the two of them. I'm not just pointing her out. Well, I don't like that they're going public about how connected they are when they clearly were not. But they won't stop talking about themselves like they're this elevated couple. It drives me nuts. Almost done. That brings us to the Oscars and the holy slap. So first, in this book, Jada acknowledges that she was frustrated with Chris Rock ahead of the Oscars because in 2016 he had criticized her for boycotting the Oscars because she wasn't invited to the Oscars in the first place. So she was hurt by that, and then she thought they had resolved the relationship, and then she was surprised when he picked on her again. And, it wasn't that she was offended because she's bald or has alopecia, but it's because she knows how damaging alopecia is for other women. So she reacted negatively. She showed that she snarled or smirked or whatever for other women, not for herself. That was she wanted the world to know it's unacceptable to make fun of alopecia because it's serious, but not because she was personally offended. Again, I think the reader looks at it and goes, "You thought about all that, Jada, or were you just personally offended?" But whatever. Will goes up there. She's surprised that he slaps Chris Rock. But it was a really powerful moment for her because she learned to love Will Smith's shadow state. Listen to this.
The holy slap helped me learn how to walk hand in hand with Will, with all the bats and gremlins. Part of him that had been banished deep into the darkest exiled lands, and to be a torch of love for him until he could find his own.
First of all, I listened to that for 14 and a half hours. Hit the like button. I deserve the like. Whether or not you like my review, the effort deserves the like button. But that's what I'm talking about, right? So the way she describes that, it's like, you're like, what are you talking about? But for her, that moment changed the game for her relationship with Will, and now they're going to live happily ever after because they are so connected. And she's learned to love herself, and you, the reader, should also learn to love yourself. That's the book. That was a long review. Let me know what you think in the comments below.